My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and it's time for some more Thursday Tolkien thoughts. And today I am thinking about the white flag of the stewards. For those of you who remember or who were paying attention in my Twitter feed when I had the trivia question recently, the stewards of Gondor did not use the regular flag that the kings of Gondor had used with the white tree and all that. They used a simple white flag, bare of any device, just plain white. Now, I found this interesting because in our modern world, when we think of a white flag, we think of surrender or parley. It's one or the other. It signifies some kind of peace. The irony here, of course, is that the stewards had anything but peace. I mean, there were short periods, of course, where the stewards had some relative peace, but it's not like they ever had long-standing peace, and they certainly never surrendered, and they certainly never bargained with the enemy. So it's kind of interesting that Tolkien uses a white flag as a means of representing what the stewards are. And I'm like, well, what does that mean exactly? Is it because the stewards are not in and of themselves a royal or noble house, and therefore, they don't really have their own standards, so they're just kind of putting a white flag as a kind of a signifying that they're not anything of themselves, but merely a stand-in for the king who should be there? Is it, something more like, we're here and we don't want to represent anything in particular because the next king that comes along might have his own standard that maybe is different from the previous king of Gondor because it might be something a little more unique, and therefore we want to start with almost literally a blank slate. Blank flag would be the actual literal thing you would say there. But, it just makes you wonder, why is it just pure white? The other interesting irony here is that far from surrendering, the stewards apparently lived in hope that there would in fact be a new king. So not only did they not surrender to, the evil armies that kept attacking them, they also never surrendered their duty, their charge, because Denethor, even, the last of the reigning stewards, would tell Boromir, it may only suffice for a couple hundred years or something for another kingdom to decide, well, you know what, we're just not getting another king. But in Gondor, it could be thousands of years, and we're still not going to give up on the idea that we might get a king. So now Denethor wasn't hoping in the sense of he would like it, but he at least lived with the thought that potentially there's still going to be a king come later on. And as a result, you could say that he's not surrendering to despair or hopelessness when it comes to the return of the king, which is another irony in and of itself, because Denethor, of all the reigning stewards, is the one who, in a sense, surrenders, because when faced with the overwhelming might of Mordor and his belief that all is lost, he does surrender to despair personally, and he kind of tells the rest of his people to do the same. He just kind of says, just why do you run away from dying? We've all got to die. You might as well die sooner rather than later. And he tries to kill himself in Faramir. So, ironically, Denethor is actually the one steward who lives up to what we might think of as the modern expectation of what that flag means. But in the story itself, as a long-standing tradition, it is precisely the opposite of that. So it's just really interesting to me that Tolkien chooses this white, which could be thought of as a blank slate or just a symbol that the steward is not really the ruler, but is merely a steward, a placeholder, a servant of the king, but is, that idea of the white flag meaning potentially surrender or something like that is basically the opposite of what the steward's house does for the entire time that it is a reigning line of, succession. And so it's just interesting to me that he would choose that. He could have chosen something else. Maybe the reigning stewards were a noble house and they had their own standard and they could have used it, which then again, that might imply that, oh, by the way, we're now just the rulers of, the kingdom of Gondor. But He just went with plain white. Yeah, he could have easily went with plain black, since that was, like the standard of the kings was black within a white tree and white stars and all that. But no, he chose just plain white, which you wouldn't see a tree on if, you tried to put a white tree on. So it's just interesting. And I'm not sure I can think of any other ideas, but if you could think of other reasons why he might have chosen a plain white, flag for the standard of the stewards, then put them in the comments below. But for now, that's my Thursday Tolkien thoughts, and I'll see you on the next one. Namarie. Thanks to all the channel supporters, especially Elf Friends, PA Brew News, Nathan DeFore, Paul Leone, and Oleg Gregg.